Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for July 16th, I believe it is. Yes, July 16th, 2024. I'm going to begin with the assessment presented yesterday by Helga Zepp-LaRouche of where we stand in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Here's what Helga had to say. Quote, "The world is still in a state of shock. The only reason the July 13th assassination attempt on Donald Trump failed was because of the extremely accidental movement of his head by a fraction of an inch, so that his ear, and not his eye, was hit. Had that movement not occurred, the shot could have been Sarajevo 2.0, for throwing the U.S. and subsequently the world into chaos, followed by a global nuclear war." She continued, quote, "The next 3.5 months will be a period of maximum danger. Escalation of military conflict around Ukraine and Southwest Asia, increasing ungovernability in France and possibly other countries, increasing financial turbulence, and above all, the escalating danger of a direct military confrontation between global NATO and Russia and China." Now, I know some of you think that this is an exaggeration, that the discussion of nuclear war itself is a fraudulent discussion. It's not going to happen. But if you believe that, you weren't paying attention to the war plans being drafted by the deranged NATO officials who just completed their meeting in Washington last week. The NATO summit was a commitment to expand NATO to the Pacific, to increase the flow of arms into Ukraine, and in the background was talk of how to beef up the Ukrainian army, which can only be done by sending in foreign troops. The question of crossing red lines is apparent with every moment of their discussion. The only question is, how much longer will the Russians respond with patience to attacks on their own territory, which the NATO leaders have now given a go-ahead to. Apparently, the NATO leaders arrogantly believe they have to have their way. They're acting like petulant, angry children, making demands, including unreasonable demands. The only difference is an angry child does not possess long-range missiles and nuclear weapons, but NATO does, through countries such as France, the United Kingdom, and the talk is now of moving more nuclear weapons into Europe using nuclear-capable jets in the air defense of Ukraine and so on. This is an escalation, and it's an escalation that is seen in Russia precisely as an escalation. I might add that an angry child does not possess a media empire to blot out an alternative to their challenge. Now, there is an alternative pathway to war and exploitative predatory neocolonial policy. This war in Ukraine, as well as the Israeli genocide in Gaza, is a result of a commitment to sustain what's called a rules-based order. The idea that there must be a control of the financial situation, a control of the flow of raw materials, a flow of investment, that must be maintained by the Anglo-American establishment. That's what the rules-based order is, that the rules are made based on the benefits to the Anglo-American establishment, the corporate establishment. I should remind you that with the loose language now talking about Nazis and fascism, that what fascism started as was what was called corporatism. The corporations' control over governments, so that those governments acted for the benefit of the corporate establishment and not for the people of the nation. That's why there's an attack on sovereignty. So sovereign nations don't stand up and defend the interests of their people against the predatory greed of the international corporations. And so what we're involved in now is looking for an alternative pathway to break away from this control of the global corporate conglomerates. And their control includes that of the so-called military industrial financial complex. Now, a pathway for diplomacy was opened by Hungary's President Viktor Orban, who did a series of meetings as in his capacity as the president of the Council of the European Union. He went to Kiev to talk to Zelensky. Clearly, Zelensky was not so interested in what Orban had to say. But he went then to Moscow and Beijing. And in his discussions with Putin and Xi Jinping, they found much in common with the pathway toward negotiations that the two of them were supporting. Then he came to the United States and he met with President Trump hours before Trump was a target for assassination. Now, by putting diplomacy up front, Orban was basically saying we need a new security and development architecture, which is what the Schiller Institute has been fighting for the last years. And the idea is a win-win cooperation, so nations work together for mutual benefit, as opposed to using the power, the military power of NATO and the United States to impose an order on countries which is for the benefit of the multinational corporations and the detriment of the living standards of the people of those nations. That's why sovereignty is an issue, because they don't want sovereign nations getting in the way of their looting. Think about Larry Fink and BlackRock moving in to take over the productive land of Ukraine. Think about the desire to repeat the looting operation of the early 1990s against Russia with the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Western bankers and corporate cartels went in to establish their control over Russia's mineral wealth. That's what the fight is about today. And we're entering a new era where, because of the military power of Russia and the economic power of China, there is an alternative, and nations from the so-called global south are turning to it. Now, Orban's initiative did not sit very well with the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels of the European Union. They're organizing, in a sense, a boycott of meetings and conferences that he's setting up. They're talking about excluding Orban, taking away the 6-month presidency from him, setting up events to conflict with those events that he's setting up, boycotting meetings with him. They can't let anything get in the way of their plans for permanent warfare. And that's why we have made an initiative. Helga Zepp-LaRouche has taken an initiative to call for the establishment of a council of reason presided over by elder statesmen, past leaders of countries, of parliaments, of city councils and state governments, to come together and talk about a pathway to peace, a break with the permanent war strategy of NATO, and to look for the ways to bring the West into a coherent cooperation with the nations of the global South, and to help them realize their desires not only for sovereignty, but for economic improvement. This is what we mean by a new security and development architecture: cooperation for the benefit of all nations and all people. So I'm including in the description section, again, the petition that we're circulating, that you should sign, you should take it to others and use it as an organizing tool. But then think about who you know, who in your country, in your state, would be considered an elder statesman who should be working with this international movement, the International Peace Coalition, for establishing the organizing committee to break away from the permanent warfare and permanent austerity of NATO and the US into a new era of peaceful cooperation. Use the petition for that. And I also will include again the LaRouche Organization's special report on the International Assassination Bureau, so you can know who it is we're up against. So thanks for joining me today. As usual, I intend to be back tomorrow.